All right, guys, we're going to throw today. Notice I am jewelry free. So I took my ring off, I took my watch off. You don't have to, but you might gouge out your project with your ring, and having clay gather up around your wristband doesn't really feel good. I have safety pins. You can put your stuff on the safety pin. Don't just leave them on your table because the likelihood of them getting lost that way is pretty high. Notice also I pulled my hair up. I don't have my long hair hanging down. I took off my loose flowy sweater. Nothing can get caught in this motor here. Before you go, you want to make sure that you have water, you have your tools, and you have a bat. These things here are called bats. These go on the wheel head to keep your, to be able to remove your clay. So underneath, there's two sets of holes. There's these holes and these. The ones with 3 dots on the edge, you want to line those up. Those are the furthest away. Put your fingers on top, line them up with your bat pins. I pull my finger out and put one on and then do the other one. If your bat's not on right, you're not throwing successfully. I already have a bat on here. So I have my clay. I wedged it up. I put it in a ball shape. The better your ball that you start with, the better centering it's going to be, the easier it's going to be. So I'm going to visualize where center is. If you need to, you can do more than visualize. You can turn on your wheel slowly and just get your finger wet and draw a little circle. And then you want to throw your clay down as close to the center as you can. I did not throw that very well, so I'm going to try again. Good. Okay. Notice I slammed it down. You don't want to just gently press it, because if you do, when you start pushing, you're going to plop the clay right off the edge. So I want to turn my wheel on like medium fast. Notice it's relatively in the middle, but it's still pretty wobbly. So I'm going to get my hands wet. My hands always start wet. This hand here, my left hand, my elbow is going to go into my hip. My hand is shaped like an L, like a chair. This part here is where all of the pressure is going to be. So I'm going to put my hand at 6 o'clock, and I'm going to push. Notice that my hand is wobbling. A lot of you do this, where your hand is going all over the place. You are in control of the clay. You tell the clay who's boss by pushing in. So notice I'm not doing anything with my other hand yet. I'm already starting to get it towards the center. I'm putting my body weight into it. So even if you don't have a lot of muscle in your arms, you still are going to be able to do this. So my clay grew. So now I'm going to take my hand, I cup it over here, and I'm going to slide it over top. This part of my finger is what's touching it. So I'm going to just start pressing down. So I'm pressing at 6 o'clock in a forward motion. I'm pressing on top in a downward motion, and that's creating the centering effect. When my clay is not wobbly anymore, I'm going to slowly take my hands off. For most of you, this step will take the whole first day, and that's okay. And what I want you to do, if you get centering and you get it right away, I want you to knock it out of center and start again. So I'm going to push. I'm going to push down. I just want you to practice centering for that whole first day. Slowly take my hands off. If I were to take my hands off really quickly, I would knock it out of center. It's really easy to knock it out of center. Okay, so we're centered. We're ready to move on. I'm going to keep this hand this way. Right now it's just a brace, just a support. So I'm going to still keep my hand locked on the back. So if you see my thumb is still touching, and take my fingers like this, and I'm going to try to find that center. What I like to do to find the center is to just drag my finger, and that'll create a little circle. And then I know where to put my hand. I'm just going to push straight down. I'm not pinching the sides at all. I'm just drilling down. If you envision your hand being the height of the clay, you want to push down to your pinky. So you want to have about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch left. To test that, when you think you've gotten it, Turn your wheel off. You're going to stick this down into the hole right in the center, and then you're going to put your finger at the top where the clay is. So I'm going to stick it down. I'm going to stick my finger at the top. I have like a whole inch, so I need to go a little bit further down. Turn the wheel off, stick it down in. Now I've got the right size. Okay, so now we're going to do what I call the dinosaur call, which this hand still stays here. My right hand, I'm going to uncross my fingers and I'm going to kind of see them like this. I'm just going to pull straight across. I'm not pulling to pinch my fingers, I'm pulling together. So I kind of actually lean my body back. So what we're doing here is we're opening up that bottom and we're setting the width of our piece. My clay is a little bit on the hard side, so. Okay, so I have my opening. If you could see, actually, this is what it looks like. So the bottom is nice and flat. The walls are pretty thick at the bottom. It's kind of shaped like a volcano, so it's still kind of going in like this. Put my bat back on. Before I do anything else, I want to take my sponge, wring it out, and I want to get some of that extra water out. And I want to kind of use it to compress the bottom. Compressed clay is happy clay. And if in the process of opening you knocked it out of center, keep your hand here. You're going to cup this hand over and push again, and that can recenter. So you're kind of making the clay run through this little channel that you created, and that's the only place it can run through, and that'll recenter it. Okay, so technically, if you've gotten to this part, you have done the easiest parts. The hardest part is still to come. So the next part we're going to do is pulling. And pulling is really a misnomer because you're not really pulling the clay so much as you're kind of pinching the clay and making it rise. So I'm going to turn my wheel speed down to about medium. My inside fingers look like this. So 2 fingers, then my thumb is on the outside. My outside fingers are kind of like my little rock-on hand. I have my thumb at my knuckle on my 2 middle fingers. I'm going to take my left thumb and I'm going to put it kind of kissing the other thumb for now. It won't always stay that way. So I'm going to take my hand on the inside. The inside hand, the job is only to make sure you don't push it too far. The outside hand, their job is to get the clay gathered. So I'm going to push my inside hand in to create a little bead. You can kind of see it right here. And then I'm going to pull that bead up slowly. The idea here is that you want to have a nice, even wall thickness going all the way up, and that's not going to happen right away. As I got to the top, I gradually lifted my pressure off so I didn't pinch the top too hard. I also want to, every couple of pulls, I want to compress the top. So I take my fingers like this, and then I cross them. So I'm making a little H. I'm just compressing the top a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a little bit of a thin top, which is what I always did when I first learned how to throw. I'm going to do it again. Inside fingers, outside fingers, thumb matching, make a little bead, and then pull her up. I'm kind of pulling slightly inward because I still want to keep that volcano shape for now. If you start pulling out, you're going to get a bowl really fast. And we want to learn how to do cylinders first, because if you can do a cylinder, you can do a bowl. If you can do a bowl, you can't necessarily do a cylinder. Cylinders are a lot harder. Okay, so it's almost getting too tall for my thumb to be out here. I'm going to show you what to do when it gets to that stage. So if I were to turn this off, up here, I've got about 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch. Down here, I can still feel I'm almost an inch thick. So I want to keep pulling, but I'm getting to the point where my thumb can't really fit outside. So I'm going to physically move my body over, and I'm going to keep my thumb out now. I'm bracing it on the other hand, but notice my elbow is straight up in the air. It's perpendicular to the back. I'm going to push in, pull straight up. We want to get the walls to be about 1/4 of an inch thick throughout. Compress the top. Notice I'm still touching my hand out here because I want to make my hands work together. Okay, I'm going to do another compression. I'm going to just feel my clay, see how far apart that is. Still pretty thick down there. So all of my fingers are inside, but this is the only finger that's doing anything, just my middle finger. If you feel like you feel a thin spot, just kind of lift up the pressure at that spot. All right, so shape-wise, it's not the most beautiful shape, but it's a good start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my needle tool, and I'm just going to trim off the skirt. So I'm going to come straight down. This is a step you don't necessarily have to do. It's just a step I like to do. So in the process of throwing, you get a lot of clay built up around the bottom. It's what's called a skirt. You can cut that off. It just makes trimming a little easier. Now I can start thinking about the shape. What do I want this to be? You should be thinking about the shape before you start, like, do you want it to be a mug or a bowl or a canister? What do you want? But what I want to make this a mug, what shape do I want to make it? So I want to do one more pull because we're still a little bit thick on the bottom. You can see inside I have like a perfect straight cylinder, and outside it kind of flares. That's how I can easily tell that it's not quite as thin at the bottom as I would like. I'm going to clean up some of that water. Okay, so if you wanted this to flare out a little bit, you could take your hand on the inside and just lightly push. You can get a little bit of a flare. If you wanted to pull it in a little bit, you can do what's called collaring. So that is where you make sure your clay and your hands are really wet. You're going to kind of keep your hands in seize, and the clay is going to touch in only 4 spots. You can kind of push the clay in. This is a slow process. This is not something that is going to be a quick. All right, so I pushed out the inside. I colored the top to make a nice shape that I like. You don't have to do those things, but just to get the shapes that you like. You can kind of see my top is all wobbly. That is not because it was not centered. It comes from an uneven pull. I'm going to turn my wheel down and put my left hand on the inside to brace. My needle tool is going to slowly turn in. So I'm going to just put it down here. If you try to go right in, right from the get-go, you're going to just jab it and you're not going to actually trim it. So now my top needs a little bit more attention, so I'm going to compress it. Something you need to pay attention to is how it's going to feel in your mouth. So if this is a cup and you go to take a drink and the lip is too thick or if it's too pulpy, it's not going to feel good and nobody's going to want to use it. So right now my rim is a little bit on the thick side. So if you look, it's a little bit thick. So I'm going to do a little mini pull just using the top of my clay. I'm going to just thin it out a little bit. And then I'm going to compress that top. All right, so I've made this the shape that I want. So now I want to get my hands nice and wet. I'm going to take my metal rib. Now these guys are sharp. So if you want to dry one of your hands off, make sure your rib is dry. There's a flat side and a rounded side. You're going to hold it on the flat side, and you're going to kind of bend it ever so slightly. So like a C. I don't want it to stay bent forever, so don't like bend it so hard, but just ever so slightly bend it. Hand that goes inside, it's going to be wet. This is going to kind of glide on the edge, starting down here, and I'm going to push the clay out to my finger, out to the rib, and you'll be able to see, you'll see these lines disappear. What I'm doing is I'm compressing the clay, and I'm making it nice and solid, and I'm also getting rid of any excess slip on the outside. So at the beginning, my rib is just going to stay. Probably can turn the wheel down a smidge. And you can kind of see I'm moving my finger up. When I get to the top of the rib, then I'm going to start moving with my finger. So I didn't take a ton of clay off. That's not my goal. My goal is to clean off the slip. So now I kind of wanted that little bit of a flare there. So I'm going to take my rib, I'm going to press it again. And this time I'm pushing out from the inside to give it that little bit of a divot. Notice I'm bracing from the inside while I'm pushing on the outside. I can also, now that I'm using my rib, I can push even harder if I want to make that even more of a push out belly. I call that the belly. Okay, so I have my vessel, my cup, which is what it's going to be, the shape that I want it to be. I'm going to come in, I'm going to compress that lip one more time. I'm going to wring out my sponge completely, and I'm going to stick it down in there because I have a bunch of water, and that water will make it so that it cracks when it dries. I'm going to smooth out all that water. I'll take my sponge like a C, go around the lip. So now is where I'm going to kind of look at it. So is it how I want it to be? All right, so you have two options now that you're done. You can wire it off. Well, you have to wire it off regardless. So I'm going to take my wire cutter, and if I take this and try to just hold it by the handles, I'm going to cut my pot in half. I'm going to wrap it around my finger so that everything fits inside of the splash pan. I'm going to press it hard against the back and pull it backwards. You can leave it on the back, or you can dry your hands off with dry hands, kind of grasp the side and put it on the windowsill. Either one's fine. I like to take it off of the bat better, but that's just personal preference, and I'm good at taking it off the bat. If you are afraid you're going to tear it up, just leave it on the bat, but you definitely have to wire it off. But now my bat has this leftover clay on it, and we don't want to have that clay go down the sink. So I'm going to put my bat back on real quick. And take this guy, turn the wheel on fast. I just moved my hand towards the middle. So that got rid of all the clay. Now I'm going to take my sponge, do the same thing. Now this guy isn't clean yet, but he's going to be a whole lot easier to clean than he was before. I'm going to take my sponge, start in the center of the wheel head, drag out. Watch out for the bat pins, get the sides. Okay, so now take your bucket of water. These things should just pull right apart, and they're full of water. So I'm going to make a smiley face. So do you see it's a smile? And I'm going to dump it into the bucket of water and scratch out all of the clay chunks. These guys still need to be washed. You're going to take this over to the sink, and you probably noticed that there is a little cup inside. This is to collect the clay chunks. Let me see if I can get this to show you. You see all those lovely big clay chunks? These are going to go into the bag on the wedging table. The rest of this is just smooth water. It's covered in clay. It's little fine clay particles, but it's all just water. This can go down the sink. So get rid of the water, come back, wash your tools, wash the table, and put the chair back where it goes. And then you guys are going to be all done. Don't forget to photograph a picture before you get cleaned up so you can put it on Google Classroom for your throwing log. Even if you failed and you don't keep it, you still want to photograph it. One more thing I forgot. Since you guys aren't going to be in here till the next day, so a full 24 hours, we don't want to just leave these drying. They'll dry way too hard and you won't be able to trim them. So whether it's on a bat or on the windowsill, grab one of these buckets that I have over, they're in the warm color paint drawer, paint cabinet, and just cover your clay up. That will allow enough air to get in there so it dries it out, but it doesn't allow so much air that it dries so much that you can't trim it anymore. And then you should be able to trim it in the next day.